Може би направо продължаваме нататък. С голямо удоволствие каня и давам думата на Йоана Маринова, представител на фондация Лъчезар Цоцорков. Те са една от организациите, чиято подкрепа даде възможност на част от вас да пътуват и да са тук днес и с така много силен фокус в социалното и емоционално учене. Заповядай.
Супер, а презентацията може да...
Извинявай. Ако искаш да започваме с представянето.
Да, добре. Не знам дали работи, видях, че друго се опитаха да учат. Добре. All right, so I am extremely pleased to see so many people here today, not only from the European partners, but also from all over Bulgaria. And just during the break, I was talking to some of you, and we're not just gathered researchers and academics, there's psychologists here, there's educators, there's consultants, there's people from all walks of life, which is really wonderful because it not only shows a commitment to the well-being of children and the future of our society, but it's also a very important ingredient to integrating social emotional learning and the topic of my presentation. That is, how do we create an ecosystem? The other two are applying a systemic long-term approach, as well as creating a living process that answers to emergent needs and has the built-in flexibility to be responsive. And I will illustrate all three in the time that we have together. So my name is Joanna, and I am the executive director of the Lăcezar Tsotsorkov Foundation. And I will be sharing with you what we're doing to contribute and to create this ecosystem here in Bulgaria. This is, of course, from the perspective of a funder and a practitioner, which I believe is important because the organizations and people who fund this work can have a huge impact just by the way that they design their call for proposals. So being well informed when structuring these interventions is crucial to the success of the programs. So when our founders created the foundation, they embedded some very ambitious goals into our charter. And we, of course, decided to start with a focus on education being at the root of all of the other causes that we supported. But education is a daunting topic that can span from birth to our last breath. So we decided to begin with the issues that we wanted to solve. Bulgaria faces an existential crisis driven by low birth rates, high immigration, low educational achievement, and inefficient public institutions, all resulting in Bulgaria being one of the poorest, if not the poorest country in the European Union. And although Bulgaria's development path over the past decade has been indeed remarkable, it has not been inclusive enough. Indeed, its economic growth does not necessarily translate into a reduction of poverty and inequality. So when we broke it all down, we found that at the root of the successes and the challenges that we faced was early childhood education. Indeed, all of the research we did show that the brain plasticity, thus the chances of success were much higher in these early developmental years. Now that we had narrowed down our age group, we had to find the intervention most likely to produce results. And Francisco will be happy that the academic research did reach us, that we did use it in designing our work. I'm sure it will come as no surprise that there's been over 213 controlled studies that show that the implementation of such programs have a huge benefit. It's important to note that even a short-term intervention produces results for the physical and mental health of students. Furthermore, we as a foundation, just like any other individual, government, and organization, work with limited resources. This means that in order to be good stewards of our resources, it made sense to direct them towards the highest point of impact, which we decided is social emotional learning. Research shows that social emotional learning has an investment with a return of 11 times in expected future productivity and potential for good and personal income as a result of development of those skills. Of course, there isn't a golden standard for social emotional learning. The international community is still developing various approaches, testing them, and studying them. So we set off with the intention to produce a diverse set of locally sourced solutions, focusing on 3 to 10-year-olds, with the goal to also create an evaluation methodology, fund interventions that would cover all regions in Bulgaria, thus accounting for the different realities faced in small towns and villages as compared to Sofia being the capital city, and that cover various target groups such as parents, education specialists, NGO professionals, children with disabilities, and children from minority and disadvantaged groups. Although the 14 interventions that we funded were relatively short in duration, they lasted from a year to a year and a half. Our strategy presented a long-term plan broken down into 3 5-year cycles, each with 4 phases. And this is, if you remember, our second factor to success, which is to make a long-term commitment. This is a journey that once the ecosystem has been created, needs to have a long-term perspective so you can really travel that road together. The phases of our strategy are research and development, synthesis, validation, and scaling. During the R&D phase, which we just completed, our plan was to fund 14 social emotional learning interventions, extrapolate the best practices from those interventions, create evaluation instruments that would track the progress of them, and form a professional learning community. During the second phase of synthesis, which we are now, we would create a working group of experts who would then synthesize these practices, which emerge from the intervention, into a methodology for teaching social emotional learning, along with a teacher training course and an instrument for direct assessment and direct evaluation, meaning that the children themselves would answer evaluation questions in order to assess the effect of the program. And lastly, secure a partnership with the Ministry of Education. Following that is validation. So it's very logical progression through the different stages. Now that we have a methodology and a teacher training, it will be time to test it, and we will do so in a sample of schools that are nationally representative. All of this leads to, of course, scaling, where we would disseminate the program on a national scale, integrate social emotional learning into the national educational priorities, and then repeat this entire cycle that you see for grades 5 to 7. It's important for me to note that everything that we develop, including the instruments, are provided at absolutely no cost to all teachers and all students in Bulgaria. Of course, if you are a practitioner in this room, you know that things that might look really neat and well organized on a paper rarely happen that way in the messy reality of real life. So our initial straightforward stage quickly grew and grew and grew and grew and grew to what you see right now on your screen. That is because our ecosystem, and this is the third element of successfully integrating CEL, is to create a living process. A living process responds to and affects its environment. And in designing our work, we aim to be responsive to the actual needs that were emerging along the way. The project we funded had a team of evaluators who designed the evaluations, instruments, and then conducted the assessment and produced a report analyzing the impact of each intervention. Няма никакъв шанс на 20 минути имам. Да. Да, пише 20 програмата. Съм се объркал, както и да е. Additionally, we had a team that monitored the projects through project reports, financial statements, and site visits. We also felt that the project partners needed support, and if we were to live up to our promise of being real partners, we needed to provide them with these resources. To that end, we made the very unorthodox decision as a funder to hire an external team of psychologists, and based on the clinical supervision model, we provided structured support and guidance through individual consultations to every single program participant for the entire duration of the project. We also created the creation of a professional learning community. This community was made up of 31 organizations. They received training, exchanged best practices, published newsletters, and in reality acted and act as ambassadors to the social emotional learning cause in Bulgaria, which then was largely unknown in Bulgaria. We quickly became aware that in order to achieve systemic change, we needed to engage the Ministry of Education and other key stakeholders. And to that end, we had to engage in advocacy. We commissioned the creation of an advocacy strategy that provided a detailed stakeholder analysis and analysis of existing regulatory and legal framework and potential options on how we can integrate CEL. So what did we achieve in this very short intervention period of time? I did mention it was a year and a half. We have nearly 400 trained teachers, over 6,000 parents, over 4,000 children, and 80 plus towns and villages in Bulgaria covered, including 3 kindergartens. All of the projects showed improvement in self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making, which is based on the CASEL framework. And on the right hand side, you can see the results extrapolated from one specific project. Keep in mind that, again, the project interventions were really short, so we didn't expect to see statistically significant improvements, but several of the projects did show those as well. So, in addition, the CEL community represented 25 organizations and grew. And in order to be ready for the next phase, we will be creating a direct instrument for evaluation. We engaged researchers, Nadia being one of them, from the New Bulgarian University and the Medical University of Varna to conduct research that identified available tools for assessing social and emotional skills. And based on what I mentioned, the third element, which is to have a living process, we had some opportunities that emerged that we couldn't say no to, one of them being OECD. They launched a new assessment instrument for social and emotional learning, an international survey, and we funded Bulgaria's participation. That research will be conducted next year. The results will be coming out in 2024. For us, it was very important to have data that we could present to the Ministry of Education in order to make our case as to why social emotional learning was important. The second program, the second point in red came as feedback from one of us program participants that mentioned that we should also integrate social emotional learning in the university programs, and to that end, we have a partnership with Sofia universities. So, of course, creating a living process means accounting for shortcomings as well as successes. So there are definitely things that we did not succeed at or that that didn't go as planned. The first point to what Dariusz was saying about that there's not so much practice in kindergartens, in preschools, we found that to be true here as well. Out of all the projects that we had applied, only 2 of them wanted to work with kindergartens, and out of those 2, only 1 successfully completed the project. This means that we don't have enough best practices to build off in the second phase of the project. However, we have not given up on working with them. We adjusted our plan so the current cycle is for 1st to 4th grade, and then we will repeat parallel the entire cycle, specifically focusing only on kindergartens. The second point will be no surprise if you are Bulgarian in this room that we struggled with was our partnership with the Ministry of Education. The reason being the unfavorable political situation. We don't have a formed parliament. There was elections held several times. And in this political instability, it's nearly impossible to secure a long-term partnership with the Ministry of Education. The last part involved parents. Almost all of the projects experienced difficulties working with parents. That is something that we have taken as feedback and will be incorporated in the next project cycle because parents remain an integral part of our process. So the next slide the next part is the synthesis, where we have formed 2 working groups of professionals that will be putting together all of these best practices and products that were produced in the first phase and creating a teacher training program as well as a methodology to teach. I already mentioned the OECD, which will conduct the actual survey in 2023, the development of the postgraduate qualification program, direct assessment, and taking on the issue of kindergartens. So to summarize, for our work to succeed, we all must commit to foster and build a viable and vibrant ecosystem. An inseparable part of this ecosystem must be an advocacy strategy. that's the only way that can lead to the systemic change that I think we're all looking for here. Secondly, to build the system, it will take time and a long-term focus that doesn't only take vision and leadership, but also consistency, persistence, and a lot of perseverance and patience. Lastly, an ecosystem is a living, breathing organism, which means not to be afraid to abandon ideas that don't work, to change course, to let go of partnerships that aren't productive, no matter how many sleepless night efforts, resources, and ego you've invested in them. At some point, you just see it's not working, and it is a good idea to just let it go. As well as to take, in order to have a living process, you have to take feedback, what Francisco was saying, because being in the middle of the work, you oftentimes miss very important points that outsiders may have that you don't. So to those of you that are practitioners, my advice is to embrace the inherent complexity of walking the uncharted path, as these principles are bound to result in a richer and much more authentic process. And in closing, consider this your official invitation. As you can see, we're only at the beginning of our journey. And if you'd like to join our ecosystem, we welcome your ideas, your feedback, your partnership and advice, so we can maybe walk the road ahead together. Да, за заключение, считайте това за официалната ви покана. Отворени сме за всякакви партньорства и ще се радваме, ако се свържете с нас. Аз след малко тръгвам, но моите колежки, Марията, дай на ръчичката ви. Там може да говорите с нея директно. Thank you so much for your time.
Въпрос?
Благодаря. Първо поздравления за амбициозния проект. Да, така изглежда просто невероятно. Понеже няколко пъти споменахте за това, че дори кратките интервенции ще доведат до позитивна промяна в една такава система, можете ли да дадете някакъв пример? Какво значи кратка интервенция в областта на социално-емоционалното учене?
Една година. Минимум една година е кратка интервенция. Да. Една учебна година.
Една учебна година.
Да.
Благодаря.
Друг въпрос или да минаваме нататък? За тази сесия... Да, не видях.
Интервенция. Няколко пъти стана дума за интервенция. Моят въпрос е вашето разбиране за понятието към кого ориентирано, към психолозите или към педагозите, когато говорим за интервенция?
Към проектни ръководители. Към това, като правиш intervention на английски, намеса в една система, ти влизаш просто. Може да се замени думата интервенция с проект.
Тоест, как да разбираме в практиката? Кой ще бъде ангажиран? Нали, вашия опит, който представяте на настоящата конференция, към кого ориентиран, тъй като в предишния лектор ние чухме, и то не веднъж се чува от психолози по отношение на педагози, как не се справят в училище. И за това въпросът ми беше, аз нарочно и изчаках и следващия лектор, да чуя, имате ли опит за съвместна работа с учители, как да преподават заедно? Защото...
Всичките проекти са направени съвместно с учители и за учители, и работната група в момента, която синтезира тези методологии, е съставена главно от учители, от начални учители. За нас това е в центъра на нашата програма и на всички тези интервенции, понеже учител е всъщност носителя на това знание и на тези програми.
Тоест, вие се ориентирате към процеса на преподаване, как да се вмъкнат тези идеи, когато учителя преподава, така? Или отделни средства, които да бъдат в тази посока, извън учебния процес?
Ние не вярваме, че социално-националното образование е отделен предмет. Това не е деца, нека сега да учим примерно за емоциите, това е нещо, което трябва да бъде вплетено.
Тоест, вплитате го в учебното съдържание.
Да, това не е допълнително съдържание, не е нещо, което е направено за натоварно прекомерно вече шумно забавени. Доста такива.
Да. Добре, благодаря.
След обяда първата презентация, с която ще започнем, е посветена на програмите, но тук само може би да вмъкна. Може би неразбирането идва от съдържанието на думата интервенция, различно съдържание. Интервенция, може би, част от нас разбират някаква намеса или т.е. работа с някакви дефицити. По-скоро разбирате широкия смисъл на понятието. Дейности, които се включват в детската градина или училището с децата.
Точно така. Мерси.